Everyone assumed they'd just gone on vacation, but what really happened was far more chilling. I'm Alex Carter, crime reporter for the Brooklyn Tribune, and on the evening of September 16, 1994, I received a terse assignment. The Davila family, a musician father, his wife, their 3-year-old son, and 2-year-old daughter, had vanished from their Utica home just days after their daughter's baptism. I expected the usual missing persons protocol, but what I found on Maplewood Drive was anything but routine. The sun dipped below a bank of rolling clouds as I rolled into the cul-de-sac. Yellow missing posters plastered every mailbox, their bright faces fluttering in a slight breeze. The Davila house stood at the end of the street, 2 stories of white clapboard, with a front porch ringed by flowering shrubs. Caution tape fluttered around the yard, where children's toys lay scattered and abandoned. An upturned tricycle, a pastel giraffe plush toy, a red plastic fire truck parked aimlessly on the dew-damp grass. I ducked beneath the tape and met Detective Ramirez on the lawn. He was tall and lean, with sharp eyes that scanned every window. "No signs of forced entry," he said quietly. "No footprints leading away, no torn curtains, no overturned furniture. Just an empty furnace grate and a thermostat stuck at 78 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like the family simply vanished." Behind him, uniformed officers cataloged details. A half-filled champagne flute perched on the coffee table, baptized 2 days earlier. The baby's white gown, still hanging neatly in the closet. A high chair pushed against the wall, its straps dangling as if waiting for its occupant. I moved through the shadowed interior, camera clicking. On the dining room table, I photographed a hand-drawn map tucked beneath a placemat. Circles in red ink marked 2 creek fords and an X at a dilapidated cabin deep in the woods beyond town, a point of interest I'd pursue later. Past the map lay a family photo pinned to the mantel. Donald Sr. clutching his newborn daughter in her lace gown, Stephanie beaming beside him, little Donald Jr. grinning with a sticky-fingered toy airplane. Outside again, I found Mrs. Harris on her porch, rocking slowly in a wicker chair. She told me she'd heard raised voices that afternoon, Stephanie refusing to lend her husband the house key, Donald Sr. slamming the door in frustration. "I thought it was a spat," she said, her voice quivering. "I never imagined he'd flee with the children, or that anyone would harm them." A sharp autumn breeze tugged at my coat as I tucked the map into my notebook. The Davilas hadn't simply disappeared. They'd been rendered missing by something, or someone, determined to erase their existence. Theories swirled: a botched kidnapping, an opportunistic stranger, or worse. But one thing was clear: the heart of this mystery lay not in the quiet house, but in the woods beyond town, where that map beckoned me deeper into darkness. As I climbed into my car, Detective Ramirez caught my eye. "Keep that map safe," he said. "If there's any clue to finding them, it's out there." I started the engine, my recorder running. The baptism party's echoes still haunted the empty rooms behind me, and I realized I was heading straight into a story that would test every ounce of my resolve and change Utica forever. The morning after I scoured the Davila home, I drove to the Utica PD station house with a head full of questions, and that hand-drawn map burning a hole in my notebook. Inside, I found Gilbert Davila, Stephanie's mother, waiting in the low-lit interview room, her grip tight on a coffee cup. Beside her sat Maria, Gilbert's 10-year-old granddaughter, who clutched a threadbare teddy bear. "Alex," Gilbert began, voice trembling. "We didn't hear a peep until 2 weeks after the baptism." She slid a business card across the table. "E. Buell, house sitter and handyman." The edges were worn, and a crooked thumbprint obscured part of the phone number. "He said Donald Sr. gave him the keys," she said. "We believed him, until he sold Stephanie's car without our knowledge." Maria burst in. "He drove away in Mommy's Toyota, Graham." Her eyes were wide, voice quavering. "Then he called and said the cult took them." Gilbert sighed, tears shining. "I called the car repo company. Edgar's name was on the sale documents. His signature." Detective Ramirez leaned back in his chair. "Edgar Buell worked as a welder until '92. Then we lost track of him. Gambling debts, alcohol charges, no steady address. He resurfaced here 2 weeks before the disappearance." He flicked through a folder of utility company bills. In August 94, someone switched the lights and water into Buell's name. That rarely happens unless you have access to account info. I studied the cell phone logs. Edgar's number pinged its final tower just half a mile from the Davila woods. His voicemail, still active, contained a single frantic message. "They're gone. Mrs. Davila took them in the night. You'll never see them again." Back at the Tribune office, I traced Edgar's steps through public records. He moved into a derelict mobile home on the edge of town that summer, begging neighbors for spare change and promising handyman work. Donald Sr. reportedly refused him shelter on the night of September 16th. "Guests leave at midnight," Mrs. Harris told me. But Edgar stayed. On the morning of the disappearance, she said, she spotted his meager duffel bag by the side door as she walked to her car. "It wasn't there the day before," she insisted. "I saw him sneak out after dark." I pored over police affidavits, 2 transactions on Stefani's credit card at a gas station 20 miles away, a call made to a payphone downtown in Edgar's voice, and finally, the sale of the Toyota for cash. Meanwhile, the Davila's bank accounts lay dormant. No ATM withdrawals, no grocery charges, no baby formula purchases. Their world had gone silent in the span of a single afternoon. That evening, I laid the evidence out on my desk, the maps circled creek fords, Edgar's business card, Mrs. Harris's account of the duffel bag, and the billing records for power and water bearing Buell's signature. A pattern emerged: access, erasure, disappearance, and a trail leading straight into the woods beyond town. As dusk settled over the Utica skyline, I closed my notebook and stared at the map's final X. Tomorrow, I would follow those coordinates into the wild, seeking answers in the very cabin Edgar claimed to maintain. Because if the Davilas were lured there under false pretenses, I was determined to uncover what happened when they crossed that threshold. The morning after I pieced together Edgar Buell's trail, I drove to the edge of Utica's forest before sunrise. I parked next to a weathered sign warning "No trespassing," tucked the hand-drawn map into my jacket pocket, and slung my recorder around my neck. The autumn air was crisp, dew glistening on fallen leaves, and the trees formed a tunnel of ochre and gold overhead. I followed the path indicated by the first circled fort. Branches scraped my shoulders, and every crunch underfoot seemed unnaturally loud. 20 minutes in, I reached the first creek crossing where the water gurgled over mossy stones. There, half buried in mud, lay a child's toy forklift, its yellow paint chipped and faded. I snapped photos, careful not to disturb it, then pressed on toward the second ford. At the second crossing, the map showed another marker. Sure enough, 2 sets of footprints, adult and child, were impressed in the chalky mud. One large, boot tread sole, the other tiny, barefooted and splayed wide. They led up a short embankment and vanished into thick underbrush. As I examined them, I noticed a third, smaller set of prints running alongside, as if a toddler had tripped and limped before being carried. I recorded the GPS coordinates and continued, heart pounding. Beyond a fallen birch, I spied the cabin's collapsed roof. Its rotted timbers lay at odd angles, and vines curled through shattered window frames. The door hung ajar on one rusted hinge. Inside, my flashlight beam revealed a ruined hearth and a scattering of debris, a rusted hammerhead stained with dark crusted residue, a jagged jigsaw blade lying atop a bundle of tattered baby clothes, and a single white baptismal ribbon, frayed at the edges. I photographed each item meticulously. In the corner, a rocking chair sat on splintered floorboards, its arms gouged deep by repeated strikes. Blood-red flakes crusted the wood's grain. I bagged a wood sliver from the chair for analysis, then noticed a torn scrap of utility bill pinned under a rock, Buell's name, and the Davila address printed clearly. It confirmed he'd switched the cabin's power into his name, cementing his access. My recorder captured the cabin's hollow silence as I cataloged these clues. No sign of bodies, no cult symbols, just instruments of violence and proof that the Davilas had been brought here, forced from their home, and silenced. Outside, I found one last piece, a child-sized shoe, its sole worn thin, wedged between 2 stones. I slipped it into an evidence bag and marked the spot with flagging tape. By late afternoon, deputies and crime scene techs arrived to excavate the shallow soil around the cabin's footprint. 9 units swept the perimeter, but no living evidence emerged. Still, the objects I'd uncovered, the hammer, the blade, the ribbon, the footprints, painted a chilling picture. The Davilas had crossed the threshold of that cabin under false pretenses, trusting the stranger who held their home's keys and paid with their lives. As the sun dipped below the trees, I retraced my steps out of the woods, the map now dog-eared and stained with mud. My recorder droned on about coordinates and items recovered, but in my mind I replayed Mrs. Harris's words. He stayed when the guests left. Now I knew why. Buell had needed privacy to carry out a carefully planned murder, hiding the family in plain sight until the forest could swallow their secrets I was determined to bring to light. September 23, 1996, more than 2 years after that baptism celebration, I returned to the cabin clearing with a sense that the final chapter of the Davila story lay buried beneath these leaf-strewn pines. A crime scene perimeter ringed the ruins, and forensic teams crouched over tools and evidence bags. I ducked under the yellow tape, recorder in hand, and met Detective Ramirez at the edge of the excavation pit. He knelt beside a shallow trench half filled with damp soil. "Bodies came up right here," he said, pointing to a cluster of small bones emerging from the earth. A crime scene tech carefully lifted a tiny femur and placed it in a labeled bag. "That's Donatella," Ramirez added. "Her gown fragments matched shards we found in that rocking chair." I knelt beside him, flashlight illuminating the scene. Nearby, larger human ribs and a skull lay side by side. Donald Jr. and Donald Sr., their skeletons collapsed in a blanket of leaf mold. Half a dozen yards away, Stephanie's bones were arranged against a mossy boulder, the skull cracked by repeated blows consistent with that rusted hammerhead. I clicked photos of each grouping, noting how the family appeared to have fallen together, as if they held one another in their last moments. The medical examiner, Dr. Alicia Patel, hovered over a small pile of hair and cloth. "Preliminary exam shows all 4 suffered blunt force trauma before burial," she said, her breath puffing in the cold. "The hammer and jigsaw blade you recovered indicate at least 2 separate weapons. It was overkill. This wasn't about silencing witnesses. It was about rage." I rose and moved toward the cabin's doorstep, where a second trench revealed the uneven floorboards. Ramirez pointed to a stain on the wood. "That's where Stephanie tried to resist. See the scrape marks on the joist? And that blood spatter, we matched DNA to her." He paused, glancing at a child-sized shoe half buried in mud. "Donald Jr. must have followed his parents in here, then fell. He probably died before they did." Each piece of evidence deepened the horror. The crumpled utility bill under a floorboard, confirming Buell's switch of power accounts, the baptismal ribbon caught in a cabin beam, a silent testament to the day they celebrated new life. I photographed the ribbon close-up, its white fibers stained brown with age and decay. Outside the clearing, K-9 units marked a narrow game trail. One officer pointed me to fresh earth in the leaf litter. "We found drag marks here, barely a foot's length," he said. Then nothing. He must have used a tarp or bag. I crouched to examine a faint groove, a final tug at the cabin's edge, where bodies had been shifted and hidden. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows through the trees, I gathered my notes. The bones, the weapons, the prints, the personal effects, all told the story of a family lured by false trust into a killer's lair and extinguished in cold blood. Standing amid the hush of the forest, I realized the Davila's final resting place was more than an answer. It was a call to justice. By February 1997, Utica's Oneida County Courthouse was packed to standing room only. Reporters elbowed each other for space behind the glass partition, and the families of Stephanie and Donald Sr. sat in the front row, faces grim with anticipation. I took my usual seat alongside Detective Ramirez. This trial had become as personal to him as it was to me. Prosecutor Maria Sanchez rose first, her voice clear and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "over 2 years ago, Edgar Buell betrayed a family's trust and lured them here, to this very cabin, under the pretense of care. You will hear evidence of a meticulously planned betrayal. Utility bills switched into his name, a forged caretaker's card, and a map guiding the victims to their death. Behind her, images of the scattered toys, the half-filled champagne flute, and the cabin's wreckage flashed on a projector." Defense attorney Robert Allen stood next. He spoke of Buell's troubled history, lost work as a welder, spiraling debts, and a lonely descent into alcoholism. "Mr. Buell is no stranger to hardship," Allen said. "He made terrible choices, yes, but this tragedy was never premeditated murder. We will show you how a desperate man snapped under pressure." Mrs. Harris, the neighbor, was the first witness. Under oath, she recounted the argument she'd overheard, Stephanie's refusal to lend her husband the house key, followed by a sudden, ominous silence. Her voice trembled as she described seeing Edgar's duffel bag on the porch after dusk, the last vestige of a caretaker gone rogue. Detective Ramirez then took the stand, detailing the forensic timeline. He described the discovery of the map beneath a placemat, the sequence of utility bill fraud, and the crucial GPS pings from Edgar's payphone call. He walked the jury through the cabin excavation, the hammerhead bearing both Buell's fingerprints and Stelany's blood spatter, the jigsaw blade with matching DNA from Donald Jr., and the baptismal ribbon interwoven with Stephanie's hair fragments. Next, Dr. Alicia Patel, the medical examiner, delivered the grim findings. She described blunt force trauma consistent with the hammer, lacerations from the jigsaw, and evidence that the 4 victims had been struck sequentially, likely in a frenzy of rage. These wounds were inflicted with intent, she stated. No accidental death could account for this brutality. Prosecutor Sanchez returned for her closing. This was cold, calculated murder, she said, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. Buell weaponized trust and turned a family's home into a mass grave. Defense attorney Allen implored empathy. Consider the man's descent, the provocations of a job lost, the isolation that drove him here. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury filed in. The foreperson's voice rang out. We find Edgar Buell guilty on all counts. A murmur of relief swept the courtroom. Buell's shoulders sagged as he was led away, the echo of handcuffs clicking in the hushed chamber. 2 days later, Judge Harriet Monroe passed sentence. You violated the sanctity of a home and the sanctity of life, she told Buell. Your betrayal demands the maximum penalty. She pronounced a life sentence without possibility of parole. The gavel fell, closing the final chapter on the Davila's tragedy, at least in legal terms. As I filed my report, House Sitter turned Slayer, Buell convicted in Davila murders, I realized the courtroom's verdict was more than justice served. It was a testament to the persistence of truth, the power of forensic evidence, and the unshakable bond of a family betrayed. It's been 3 years since the courthouse doors closed on Edgar Buell's life sentence, but the Davila tragedy still echoes through Utica's quiet streets. I'm Alex Carter, and in that time, I've watched a community try to heal and learned how some wounds never fully close. Maplewood Drive is no longer plastered with missing posters. Flower beds once wilted with grief now burst with annual blooms. The cabin in the woods was demolished last spring, its timbers burned in a private ceremony attended by police and the Davila family. Yet residents still speak of stumbling upon a stray toy or a fragment of ribbon in the underbrush, as if the forest sometimes coughs up reminders of that horrific night. Buell's conviction set new precedents in New York State, tighter regulations on caretaker background checks, mandatory alerts when utility accounts change hands, and crime scene data sharing between local and federal agencies. Investigators tell me these measures helped solve other cold cases, turning one family's nightmare into safeguards for thousands of others. I met with Gilbert Davila last fall at her daughter's favorite coffee shop. Over matching lattes, she confessed that some mornings still begin with a start, half expecting Stephanie to bust through the door. Yet she's channeled her loss into advocacy, volunteering with a local child safety coalition and speaking to parents about stranger awareness. For me, the Davila story underscored the fragility of trust. It showed how quickly ordinary kindness, handing over house keys, can be manipulated into betrayal and bloodshed. As a reporter, I carry a map stained with mud and hope that no other family ever follows its path into darkness. Utica's annual baptism celebration now includes a moment of silence for Donatella and her family, a quiet testament to lives cut short. And each year, when balloons are released into the sky, they carry both sorrow and resilience, a community's vow never to forget. I filed my last dispatch on the Davila case with a mix of relief and solemn pride. Justice was served, but the true measure of closure came in small acts. A neighbor checking on a solitary toy, a legislator tightening safety laws, a grandmother finding purpose in her grief. The story began with a baptism and ended in a grave, but its legacy lives on in every life protected and every warning heeded.